What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Overanalysis. Today we're continuing our series looking at the best and worst ADPs in the draft. Today we're going to be talking about round 2. And the second round of a draft is very similar to the first round. These are all guys that carry very high ceilings and pretty stable floors. There are a couple of guys that are potential landmines that are going in this range though, and this is also a point in the draft where you've got to make a decision whether or not you're going to be in on some of the elite tight ends. So right now, looking at the guys that are currently going in round 2, we have DeVon Achane, Saquon Barkley, Omarion Hampton, Chase Brown, Drake London, Ken Walker, A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Nico Collins, and George Pickens. So first guy going in this round is DeVon Achane, and Achane comes off back-to-back finishes as the RB5. And with the first pick in the second round, 13th overall, that's just going to be way too high of a price tag for me for DeVon Achane, given some of the risk that he carries this season. The first thing that concerns me with DeVon Achane is the loss of Mike McDaniel as his play caller. McDaniel, fired as the Dolphins head coach at the end of last season, did a great job at maximizing Achane in his first 3 years in the league. McDaniel designed some great offensive schemes and was able to get Achane in space quite a bit and fed him a great amount of passing volume. And while Achane is absolutely still going to be featured in this Miami offense, the problem is the supporting cast around him has also gotten quite a bit worse. Jalen Waddle was traded away in the offseason, leaving Miami with one of the worst wide receiver rooms in the league. So right now, the wide receiver room in Miami goes something like this. You've got a combination of Malik Washington, Jalen Tolbert, Tutu Atwell, and then rookies like Kevin Coleman, Chris Bell, Caleb Douglas. When you have such a subpar wide receiver room, what do you think defenses are going to do? They're going to make sure that the one explosive guy on this offense, DeVon Achane, doesn't beat them. The next problem with Achane is at quarterback, Miami going to Malik Willis this season, and Willis is a guy that is going to be looking to run and scramble first. He's going to check down to Achane a lot less than an immobile guy like Tua Tagovailoa had done over the last few years. And if the passing volume for Achane goes away and he dips below 50 receptions this season, then that's just a gigantic hit to his floor and his ceiling. And on top of everything else, given that Achane plays for such a bad team in the Miami Dolphins that's expected to be one of the worst in the league this year, you always have the risk that a running back like Achane is going to be shut down towards the end of the season. So with all these negative factors at play, DeVon Achane at the 201 is just something that I can't get behind. There's so many running backs, particularly in this round, that I would take above him. Next up at the 202, we've got Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. And Barkley last year in fantasy was a disappointment. He finishes as the RB14 1 year after finishing as the RB2. And really though, it shouldn't come as that much of a surprise. History shows that running backs that take on the volume that Barkley had in 2024 historically regressed the year after. And Barkley last year literally lost about half of his production from 2024. He goes from a 2,000-yard season down to just 1,100 yards, 14 rushing touchdowns down to just 7. And a lot of fantasy managers last year spent their first overall pick on Barkley and came away very underwhelmed. Well, now because of the disappointing year, you can get Barkley at a discounted price this season. And there's a lot of reasons to be in on Barkley at the 202. For one, the Eagles get a new offensive coordinator. Kevin Patullo was just such a disaster last season. Patullo's scheme just had absolutely no creativity or innovation in it whatsoever, unlike what Kellen Moore brought to the table a year before. And now the Eagles turn things over to Sean Mannion, who's going to try to install a bunch of new things and get the Eagles running a much more modern offense. And Barkley is still going to be a focal point of this offense. He's also going to have a healthy offensive line this season. Cam Jurgens, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson all missed significant amounts of time last season with injury. So I absolutely could see a bounce-back season coming for Saquon Barkley. Something in the range of 1,500 yards, double-digit touchdowns, and about the same in what he's been in terms of receptions. Keep in mind, Jalen Hurts also a quarterback that's going to look to run first before he looks to dump off to his running backs. So it's hard for me to see Barkley's receiving upside going beyond 40 receptions. So I view Barkley very similarly to how I view James Cook in round 1. While I don't know that Barkley still has RB1 overall in his range of outcomes, I think he's a very safe pick that's going to be somewhere close to the top 5 range, if not inside it altogether. So absolutely, I'm buying the dip on Saquon Barkley. I think the 202 is a fine spot for him to be going in, and I would even consider taking him in the back end of round one above some guys like Ashton Genty, CeeDee Lamb that are currently going inside the top round. Next up at the 203, we have Omarion Hampton of the Chargers, and Hampton finished as the RB35 in his rookie year. Most of his year was lost to an ankle injury. But during the weeks that we got Hampton on the field and in a featured role, we saw the flashes of a future RB1. Hampton gets a massive play caller upgrade this year with the addition of Mike McDaniel, who we just talked about with DeVon Achane, what he was able to do for him in his first couple seasons. Now, those same things that Achane benefited from, the high passing volume, the great play design, the fantasy-friendly scheme, now all applies to Omarion Hampton. And even if Hampton ends up splitting some of the work with Keaton Mitchell, Mike McDaniel has shown that he's been able to support two running backs in fantasy. Keep in mind, back in 2022, Raheem Mostert and DeVon Achane were both RB1s in points per game. Hampton at 203 is someone that I'm going to be in on, and similar to Barkley, I would take him above guys like Ashton Genty and CeeDee Lamb that I think have much more limited ceilings in round one. Next pick in this round, Chase Brown at the 204, another guy that I'm going to be in on. Brown has back-to-back finishes as an RB1, finishing as the RB10 and the RB7, and really last season, you feel like Brown could have finished even higher had Joe Burrow been able to play the full year. There was a stretch where Chase Brown had just 5 straight unusable weeks, weeks 2 through week 6, and these were the weeks where Jake Browning was the quarterback for the Bengals. Before Joe Flacco got there, the Cincinnati offense just couldn't do anything at all. However, once Flacco got there and brought some stability to the offense, Brown had no less than 17 fantasy points per game the rest of the season, which is just an outstanding floor. So if we get a full, healthy season from Joe Burrow, then maybe it's possible for Brown to reach even higher heights, finishing potentially as a top 5 running back that you can get at the 204. We've seen Brown deliver value purely from the passing volume that he gets alone. If he ever were to run hot with touchdowns and produce a double-digit scoring season, then the sky's the limit for this guy. So really, these running backs that are going at the top of round 2, whether you want to go for Saquon Barkley, Omarion Hampton, Chase Brown, all 3 of these guys I think are just fantastic picks in this range. At the 205, Drake London was on his way to a fantastic season before a PCL injury derailed it and caused him to miss most of the second half of the season. London, plain and simple, is just a true alpha receiver. He doesn't have a lot of target competition. The Falcons still didn't bring in any kind of viable wide receiver 2. And Kyle Pitts, we've seen when Drake London is healthy, doesn't command that large of a target share. So with London, he's going to go out and get double-digit targets per week. The Falcons are going to move him all over the formation. They're going to give him a lot of looks out of the slot, and they're going to give him a fantastic role in the red zone as well. So, given the role that he has and what he's produced when healthy, if Drake London is able to stay healthy for the entire season, then I don't think there's any doubt that he's going to give you first-round production in the middle of round 2. So from the 206 on is when we start to get into a little riskier territory in round 2, and that starts with Ken Walker, running back for the Chiefs. Walker throughout his career has just been one of the most frustrating players to own in fantasy football. He's a guy that you can so obviously see the talent, you see the explosiveness, you see what he could be, but for one reason or the other, it just never seems to come together. Last season, the Seahawks had him in that frustrating split with Zach Charbonnet, and they just wouldn't give Ken Walker any kind of goal line work whatsoever. So now Walker gets out of Seattle, and he goes into a situation where, by all accounts, he should be the featured RB1 for the first time in his career. And the Chiefs have also talked quite a bit about getting him involved in the passing game, using him on screens. Those are all great things that you want to hear for Walker's usage. The one thing you worry about with Ken Walker, though, is whether he can hold up physically through the entire season, and I think that's why the Seahawks never quite gave him the volume that fantasy managers would have liked to see him get. But the good news for Walker is the Chiefs don't have a Zach Charbonnet on their roster. They don't have anybody that's worthy of challenging him for goal line work or taking any kind of significant snap share away from him. So if there was ever a year to be fully in on Ken Walker, I think this would be the year. If he doesn't pay off his ADP and finish as an RB1 this season, then plain and simple, it's never going to happen. I actually think that if healthy and if he gets the full workload that we expect him to get, Walker has a higher ceiling then guys like Saquon Barkley, Omarion Hampton, and Chase Brown that are going ahead of him. However, I do think he has a riskier floor than all three of those guys given the injury history. Next up at the 207, we have A.J. Brown of the Patriots, and Brown coming off of back-to-back disappointing years with the Eagles. Brown finishing as the wide receiver 20 in 2024 and the wide receiver 11 last season. And the big thing that happened with A.J. Brown the last 2 years were that the Eagles transitioned to becoming a run-first team when they brought in Saquon Barkley, and that just killed so much of his target volume. Brown, before Barkley, averaged around 150 targets in his first 2 years with the Eagles. The last 2 seasons, Brown gets only 121 and 97. So Brown now goes into a situation this year with Drake May where he's going to be with a quarterback that may be the best pure passer that he's ever been with in his career. Brown has posted wide receiver 1 finishes in his career despite being tied to mediocre quarterbacks like Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee or Jalen Hurts, who never really ran like a high passing volume system. With Brown, however, now though, entering his age 29 season, there is a little bit of concern that he's beginning to decline physically. There's been talk that he's got a degenerative knee condition, and even Brown, early in training camp with the Patriots, has not gotten a lot of positive reports so far. However, oftentimes in fantasy football, volume is just king, and I don't think the Patriots are going to bring A.J. Brown in if they're not going to feature him prominently. So I think there's potential here for the best season that A.J. Brown will ever have in his career statistically. And I think that even if he falls off a little bit physically, the volume that he's going to get is going to be more than enough to sustain him as a wide receiver 1 this year. I do think he's very appropriately priced at the 207. Whether or not I target him or not is going to completely depend on whether I decide to go early tight end with a Brock Bowers, which we'll get into shortly. Next up at the 208, you have Derrick Henry. And Henry, again, just such a safe pick that you can make in the second round. You know with Henry, you're going to get 1,200 plus yards, double-digit touchdowns. He's not going to get a lot of receiving work, but when he's producing at such a high level on the ground and has such an elite red zone role, it's okay that he's only going to catch around 15 to 20 passes per year. The only real concern that we ever have about Derrick Henry is his age, and while last season it did look at times like we were starting to see a bit of a fall off, I think part of that could just as easily be attributed to the Ravens' offensive situation last year with Lamar Jackson not being 100% was not great. And as we saw in championship weekend, week 17 last season, on any given week, Derrick Henry could still throw it down these 50-point monster 200-yard, 4-touchdown games that win you a week on his own. So if you were to miss on the high-end running backs of this round, then I have absolutely no problem going Derrick Henry in the back end of the second round as your RB2 or even as your RB1 still. And then at the 209, you have Brock Bowers, who is just, I think, in a class by himself at the top of the tight end ranks. Bowers in his rookie season catching 112 balls for almost 1,200 yards and 5 touchdowns. Last year he falls off to the tight end 11, only due to injury. If he were healthy for the full season, then I think he would have finished as the tight end 1, even above the season that Trey McBride had last year. So whether or not it's worth it to spend a pick in this range on an elite tight end, I think is definitely an interesting conversation. For me, I tend to be much more in the camp of going late round tight end, and it's a strategy that's worked very well for me over the last few years. 3 years ago, Sam Laporta was the tight end 1 overall, completely free in the back end of drafts. Brock Bowers, 2 years ago, finishes as the tight end 1 overall, completely free in the back end of drafts that year. And even last season, you could go a guy like Tyler Warren in the double-digit rounds, and he finishes as the tight end 4. This year, I love guys like Isaiah Likely, Chika Okonkwo. These are all guys that I don't think they're going to carry the same high-end finishes that Sam Laporta or Brock Bowers had, finishing as tight end 1s overall, but I definitely think those guys are going to significantly outperform their ADPs. That being said, I don't have any doubts that Brock Bowers is going to be an excellent pick in the range he's going in the second round. I myself, the only scenario that I could see myself coming away with Bowers is if I were to miss on almost every single one of these round 2 running backs. I just think with running back, there's such a fall off after this round, and getting one of these elite higher end guys is something that I feel much more comfortable building my team around especially when I'm confident that I can hit on a late round tight end or two. Now, with Trey McBride at the 210, he's somebody that I'm going to be out on this season. And that's tough for me to say because I'm a big Trey McBride guy. He was a major target for me last season. But this year, I think there's just so many things that are going to be working against him. For one, the Cardinals just have such a tough schedule. And then you have the whole quarterback situation. I don't think we're going to be getting Jacoby Brissett for the full season. Definitely not when it matters most, when the schedule softens up and the Cardinals actually get an elite schedule towards the fantasy playoffs. But at some point, we're going to be turning things over to Carson Beck. And once that happens, it's just going to lower the ceiling for McBride and the other Arizona pass catchers. So really, Bowers is the only guy that I'm going to consider at the tight end position in this range. If I miss on him, then I'm going to pass on McBride. And then the next tight end that I'm going to consider drafting early is going to be Colson Loveland. Nico Collins is next up at the 211. And while Collins is not somebody that I'm overly excited about, I don't hate him going in the back end of this round 2 range. Earlier in the summer, he was going at the 1-2 turn. He's now fallen pretty significantly down to the 2-3 turn. And at that range, I'm a lot more interested in Collins. Nico has finished as a wide receiver 1 2 of the last 3 seasons, finishing as the wide receiver 8 last year and the wide receiver 12 in 2023. The problems with Collins are, 1, you've got health. Collins has missed at least 3 games in every year of his career. He's a guy that has trouble staying healthy, and he's proven that he's a lock at this point to miss at least a decent chunk of the season. And then you also have the fact that the Texans are going to be playing in what's probably going to be a low passing volume offense. The Texans still have a great defense, and they're going to be looking to run the ball first. They're going to be in a lot of run-friendly game scripts as it is, so there's not going to be a ton of games where Nico's going to be getting elite volume that you want a wide receiver 1 to have. But if you miss on the guys going ahead of him in this round, it's not the worst thing in the world to end up with Collins in the back end of this round. However, I will say that I would have zero problem, and I mean zero problem, drafting guys like Emeka Egbuka or Luther Burden ahead of Collins in this round, even though their ADPs aren't going until the back end of round 3, early round 4. So with both Egbuka and Luther Burden, these are 2 players that are must-have guys for me that are going in similar ranges in the draft. And if I don't feel good about where I'm at in round 2, if I miss on the elite running backs in this tier, if I miss on Brock Bowers, then I would have zero problem taking Egbuka or Burden in a range like this over a guy like Collins, over a guy like Pickens, and then giving myself a shot to come away with the other guy, whether it's Burden or Egbuka, at cost at the back end of round 3 or round 4. And then the last pick in this round, George Pickens, I have very similar thoughts to him as I do on Collins. With Pickens, he's a guy that is the wide receiver 2 in Dallas. He did have a fantastic season last year, but last season you were able to get him at a much more affordable range, the round 4, 5, 6 range. This year, following the pinnacle year, you're now paying up to get George Pickens. And we've seen in the past when you have to pay this back-end second-round pick for the wide receiver 2 on these offenses. Think in the past when you've had to pay up for T. Higgins next to Jamar Chase, or you've had to pay up for Jalen Waddle next to Tyreek Hill, or you've had to pay up for Devontae Smith next to A.J. Brown. When you're paying the premium, the high-end second-round pick for these wide receiver 2s on good offenses, it's a lot harder for those guys to pay off that ADP than it was for them when they were going at a much cheaper price. And while Pickens is certainly going to have his share of high-end games, it's still going to be tough for him to do that on a regular basis as long as CeeDee Lamb's in the lineup. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. So with the second round, there's a lot of really good picks in this range still, particularly at the running back position. Whether you want to go Saquon Barkley, Omarion Hampton, Chase Brown, Ken Walker, Derrick Henry, these are all guys that carry just elite upside, and most of them carry pretty safe floors to go with them as well. Drake London, another fantastic pick in round 2, a wide receiver 1 that just does everything you want a guy in that range to do. He's going to get the volume, he's going to get work out of the slot, he's going to get the red zone work. A.J. Brown, also somebody that I think is just going to thrive with the amount of volume that's going to be on his side this year. And Brock Bowers, if you want to start out with an elite tight end, you absolutely can't go wrong with that either. Really, the only fades in this round for me are going to be the guys at the very bottom of this round the McBrides, the Collins, the George Pickens. At that point, that's the range where I'm really going to start considering going after the guys that are must-have players for me and reaching a little bit above what their ADPs currently are. But I thank you guys so much for watching, and we will talk to you next time when we start to go over round 3.